Babylon. The very name evokes images of towering ziggurats, splendid walls of glazed brick, and myths of a city steeped in wealth and wonder. Once the capital of mighty empires in ancient Mesopotamia, Babylon rose from humble beginnings on the Euphrates River to become a byword for imperial glory, and later, moral caution and religious tradition. Babylon's story begins on the fertile plains of southern Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers Tigris and Euphrates. The city's name in the Akkadian language was Bab-Ilim, meaning Gate of God, or Gate of the Gods. In later Hebrew tradition, this was linked to Babel, associated with Baalal, to confuse, from the biblical tale of Babel's Tower, a legend we'll revisit later. The earliest known mention of Babylon dates to around the 23rd century BCE during the Akkadian Empire. At that time, Babylon was likely a small provincial town or port on the Euphrates, overshadowed by older Mesopotamian cities. It truly entered history as an independent city-state around 1894 BCE, when an Amorite chieftain named Sumu-Abum established a local dynasty. For a century or more, Babylon remained just one of many city kingdoms in Mesopotamia. That changed dramatically under King Hammurabi, ruled 1792 to 1750 BCE. Hammurabi was the sixth king of his Amorite line and would become Babylon's first great empire builder. Through shrewd diplomacy and force, he conquered surrounding city-states and unified southern Mesopotamia, making Babylon the capital of a kingdom stretching across Sumer and Akkad, and even parts of Assyria to the north. Under Hammurabi's reign, Babylon grew from a modest town into the preeminent political and commercial center of the region. Its advantageous location on the Euphrates, near vital trade routes, helped it flourish as a hub of trade and administration. By the 18th century BCE, Babylon was on its way to becoming one of the largest cities in the world, its population perhaps in the tens of thousands and growing. Hammurabi is also famed for the Code of Hammurabi, a collection of laws inscribed on a stone stele. This law code, often cited as one of the earliest written legal codes, gives modern historians a wonderful window into daily life in Old Babylonian times. The laws address everyday matters like contracts, inheritance, wages, marriage, and crime, reflecting a complex society with agriculture, trade, and family life all regulated by custom and precedent. Interestingly, scholars note that Hammurabi's code may not have been literally enforced line by line. Rather, it likely served as a public statement of justice and royal authority. Regardless, the stele, now in the Louvre Museum, depicts Hammurabi receiving the laws from Shamash, the sun god of justice, a powerful image of the divine sanction behind Babylon's king and legal system. With Hammurabi's conquests, Babylon became the seat of an empire, often called the Old Babylonian Empire, and eclipsed older sacred cities like Nippur in prestige. Southern Mesopotamia even came to be known as Babylonia after its capital. Upon Hammurabi's death, however, the unity he forged was fragile. His successors struggled to hold the kingdom together, and Babylon's empire quickly unraveled. Within a few generations, Babylon shrank back to a regional power amid the jostling of rival states. A dramatic turning point came in 1595 BCE, when Hittite armies from Anatolia swept down the Euphrates and sacked Babylon. The Hittites did not stay to rule. They took plunder and promptly withdrew, but their raid left Babylon in disarray. In the power vacuum, a people known as the Cassites seized control around 1570 BCE. The Cassites, originating from the Zagros Mountains, would rule Babylonia for more than 4 centuries, one of the longest dynasties in Babylon's history. They moved the capital briefly, but ultimately Babylon remained the political and cultural center of their kingdom. The Cassite kings even adopted Babylon's god Marduk, further elevating him. During this era, Babylon became a major religious and literary center, and Marduk rose to supreme rank in the Mesopotamian pantheon. Tellingly, the Cassites themselves called Babylon Karanduniash in their language, but the old name and its reverence endured. Babylon's prestige grew such that even foreign conquerors took on its trappings. In 1158 BCE, the city was sacked by the Elamites from present-day Iran, ending the Cassite dynasty. Yet a native dynasty soon revived Babylon's fortunes. notably under King Nebuchadnezzar I, not to be confused with the later Nebuchadnezzar II. Reigning circa 1124 to 1103 BCE, Nebuchadnezzar I celebrated victories, particularly against Elam, and restored Babylonian pride, making Babylon his capital. The very fact that new dynasties, even if they originated elsewhere, centered themselves at Babylon underscores the city's acknowledged political supremacy and holy status in Mesopotamia. Babylon at its height was not only a place of palaces and temples, but also a living city bustling with ordinary people, farmers, merchants, craftsmen, priests, and officials. Historians estimate the city's population may have exceeded 100,000 by the 6th century BCE, making it perhaps the largest city in the world in its time. What was life like for these ancient Babylonians? Family and social structure formed the bedrock of Babylonian society. Families were typically patriarchal, with the eldest male as head, but women in Babylon enjoyed a remarkable amount of legal rights and social participation for the ancient world. Babylonian women could own property, engage in business, inherit and bequeath wealth, and even appear in court on their own behalf. Some women served as priestesses, or in other official roles. Marriages were usually monogamous. It was rare for a man to take a second wife unless the first was unable to have children. Extended families often lived nearby or together. Houses might cluster by kin. Indeed, houses in Babylon were typically mud brick structures organized around an open courtyard, with rooms opening onto this central space. From the street, one would see only high windowless walls and a single door leading inside. Privacy was valued, and the courtyard provided light, air, and a family gathering space. Homes and land tended to stay in the family across generations, passed down rather than sold, and it was common to bury deceased family members under the courtyard, literally keeping ancestors close to home. Babylonian society was stratified into social classes, but there was some fluidity. At the top were the royalty and high priests of the great temples. Below them, records and Hammurabi's texts identify the Awilu, free persons of property, and the Mushkenu, commoners. The Awilu were like an upper middle class, landowners, merchants, officials, while Mushkenu were free people who might not own land, including artisans and farmers. At the bottom were the wardom, slaves, though Babylonian slavery was often a temporary condition or limited in scope. Many slaves were debtors. A person who fell into unpayable debt might become a bondservant to their creditor until the debt was worked off. Others were war captives from Babylon's campaigns, or children born into slave families. However, Babylonian law allowed slaves to conduct business, earn their freedom, and their children born to free mothers were free, so it wasn't always a permanent hereditary caste. Economically, agriculture was the foundation of life. The Babylonian countryside was laced with canals and irrigation dikes, fed by the Euphrates. Farmers grew barley as the staple grain, the source of bread and also beer, a daily beverage, along with dates from palm orchards and a variety of vegetables in garden plots. A Babylonian beer was a thick, nutritious brew often drunk through straws, and bread was made in clay ovens from the hardy barley. Wool from sheep was another pillar of the economy. Tens of thousands of sheep grazed in the dry plains and foothills beyond the irrigated zones. Each spring, as the sheep shed, massive shearing, or rather combing, campaigns took place. The wool was collected and brought to large workshops. In fact, records speak of a royal plucking house storing the huge piles of wool each season. From this, Babylon's textile industry thrived. Women in particular worked as weavers, producing high-quality woolen textiles in various patterns and colors. These textiles became valuable trade goods, exchanged with distant lands for things Babylonia lacked, such as metals, copper, tin, gold, high-quality timber, cedar from Lebanon, and precious stones. Babylon was a trade crossroads. Caravans and riverboats moved goods in and out, and markets bustled with merchandise from across Mesopotamia and beyond. In the city, craftsmen such as potters, metalsmiths, leatherworkers, and builders plied their trades. Babylon was famed for its crafts, including the distinctive glazed bricks that would later adorn its monuments. The city's streets were busy with merchants carrying goods, scribes hurrying to record transactions on clay tablets, and children going to school to learn cuneiform writing, mostly the sons of the elite or scribal families. There were also taverns and beer houses, bakeries selling date cakes and bread, and open courtyards where people could buy food or hear storytellers recite epic tales. Babylonian law and justice was advanced and carefully documented. Local courts with panels of 7 judges would hear disputes and crimes. They relied on witness testimony under oath, written contracts, and evidence, practices that feel surprisingly modern. If a man brought a case, the judges might appoint an independent investigator to dig into facts. Verdicts were then decided by majority vote of the judges. Punishments under Hammurabi's code varied according to the crime and the social status of those involved. The principle of an eye for an eye applied among equals, though fines were more common penalties for property offenses. The code also shows concern for protecting the weak. For example, it set grain rations for priestesses and penalties for husbands who wronged their wives. Overall, these records depict a society with structured governance and rule of law, where contracts and courts provided some predictability in daily life. Religion touched every aspect of life in Babylon. The Babylonians were polytheistic, worshipping a large pantheon of gods and goddesses with great devotion. At the head of the pantheon by the late 2nd millennium BCE stood Marduk, the patron god of Babylon, who was revered as the divine king of the gods. This status was not always so. Earlier Sumerian traditions had placed Enlil of Nippur, or the sky god Anu, at the top, but as Babylon's political prestige grew, its city god Marduk was elevated to supremacy, especially during the Cassite and later periods. Babylonian theologians even edited older myths to give Marduk a central role. One of the most important Babylonian myths is the Enuma Elish, the epic of creation. In this epic, Marduk heroically battles Tiamat, the primeval goddess of chaos, often envisioned as a raging dragon or sea serpent. After vanquishing Tiamat and her monsters, Marduk creates the world from her remains, splitting her like a carcass to form the heavens and earth. He then establishes order in the cosmos, organizing the gods and constellations. Babylon itself is founded in the myth as a divine city. The gods decree that Marduk's victory be celebrated by building him a splendid temple as a dwelling above all others, and that temple is at Babylon. Thus, in Babylonian belief, their city was nothing less than the center of the world, ordained by the gods, literally the gate between heaven and earth. Humans, according to the myth, were fashioned from clay and the blood of a defeated god, created to serve the gods by maintaining their temples and worship, giving a religious rationale for the everyday labor that Babylon's people performed for the temple institutions. In practice, worship in Babylon was centered on the many temples that dotted the city. Chief among them was the Asagila, the great temple of Marduk, and alongside it the Etemenanki, a massive stepped tower, Ziggurat, dedicated to Marduk. The Etemenanki soared perhaps 7 levels high. Some scholars believe this structure inspired later legends of the Tower of Babel, the tower whose top reached the heavens described in Genesis. Herodotus, the Greek historian, later wrote of a colossal 8-tier tower temple in Babylon, likely referring to Etemenanki, which by his time may have been in disrepair. The biblical story of Babel, meanwhile, never uses the name Babylon explicitly, but the association of a lofty tower and the confusion of languages became indelibly linked with Babylon's legacy. Across the city were temples to other major gods as well: Ishtar, goddess of love and war; Nabu, god of wisdom and writing, Marduk's son; Sin, the moon god; Shamash, the sun god of justice; Adad, storm god, and more. Each of these deities had a cult statue housed in the innermost sanctuary of their temple. To the Babylonians, these statues were not merely representations. They were the gods themselves residing among the people. Every day, teams of priests cared for the god's statue as one would a living king. They washed it, dressed it in fine clothes and jewels, and offered meals of food and libations 3 times a day. Only the purified clergy could enter the god's presence in the shrine. Ordinary people participated in worship through prayers, sacrifices, and festivals, but they did not enter the Holy of Holies. Instead, they might catch a glimpse of the deity's form on special occasions when the statue was brought out. For example, During the great New Year festival, Akitu, each spring, Marduk's statue was paraded through Babylon's streets so that all could honor him, and statues of other gods from neighboring cities would travel to Babylon to visit Marduk, a grand procession symbolizing Babylon's religious centrality. The festivals were joyous occasions with music, offerings, processions, and prayers. Babylonian religion also had a profound personal aspect. Families often had household gods or protective deities they worshipped at small domestic altars. These could include lesser-known gods or deified ancestors. People might wear amulets of their favorite gods and invoke them in daily life for blessings of health or fortune. Magic and divination were common as well. Babylonian priests were skilled in interpreting omens from the stars, the livers of sacrificial sheep, or unusual births and dreams. In fact, astronomy/astrology was highly developed in Babylon. We will discuss this later as part of Babylon's scholarly legacy, and tied closely to religion. The movements of planets and stars were seen as messages from the gods. One intriguing artifact of Babylonian belief is the Queen of the Night relief, a terracotta plaque, likely Old Babylonian circa 1800 BCE, depicting a winged goddess figure with clawed feet, flanked by owls and perched on lions. Scholars debate which goddess she represents, possibly Ishtar in her fearsome aspect, or perhaps the underworld goddess Ereshkigal. This striking image, often called the Burney relief, now in the British Museum, gives a glimpse of the rich iconography of Babylonian mythology. Fertility and ferocity united in the figure of a goddess, commanding animals of the night and symbols of power. It reminds us that Babylonian religion embraced the feminine divine alongside male gods. Ishtar, for instance, was wildly popular and had temples and cult prostitution practices in her honor, and goddesses like Gula, healing, Nanshi, prophecy, and Tiamat, chaos, featured in their lore. The Babylonians lived in awe of a cosmos filled with divine presence. From sun and moon to storm and love, each aspect of life was governed by a deity to be respected and placated. Despite its cultural glory, Babylon often found itself under the shadow of more militaristic empires. During the early first millennium BCE, Mesopotamia saw the rise of the Assyrian Empire to the north. The Assyrians were fierce conquerors, and Babylon, rich but militarily weaker, became a prize and a pawn in Assyrian imperial politics. From the 9th century through the 7th century BCE, Babylon was frequently under Assyrian control. However, the relationship was complex. The Babylonians deeply resented foreign domination, yet they also had common cultural and religious ties with the Assyrians, who also spoke Akkadian and revered many of the same gods. Initially, Assyrian kings tried to govern Babylonia by installing vassal kings of Babylonian origin, or even themselves assuming the Babylonian crown, often under a local throne name. King Tiglath-Pileser III of Assyria, ruled 745 to 727 BCE, was one of the first to directly intervene, defeating a Chaldean usurper and proclaiming himself king of Babylon. His successors followed suit. There was a recurring pattern. Local Chaldean tribal chiefs, Chaldeans were an Aramaic-speaking people in southern Babylonia, would rebel or claim the throne, and the Assyrian army would march in to restore order. Babylon's citizens often preferred Assyrian overlordship to that of the unruly Chaldean warlords. As Britannica notes, Babylon's urban elite had secured certain privileges, exemptions from some taxes, corvée labor, and the like, which Assyrian kings usually respected, whereas tribal usurpers did not. Moreover, Babylon's wealthy merchants benefited from the stability and international trade network the Assyrian Empire provided. Thus, paradoxically, the Babylonians found the foreign Assyrians to be better protectors of their prosperity than their own upstart neighbors much of the time. Still, Assyrian rule was uneasy. The Babylonians were proud of their heritage and chafed under direct foreign control. The situation reached a boiling point under King Sennacherib of Assyria. In 689 BCE, after yet another rebellion in Babylon, Sennacherib lost patience and utterly destroyed the city. According to his own records, he razed Babylon's walls, temples, and palaces, and dynamically diverted the waters of the Euphrates over the city's ruins, condemning the site to desolation. This act shocked the Mesopotamian world. Destroying Babylon was sacrilegious to many, even among the Assyrians, because of Babylon's sacred status. Indeed, Sennacherib's decision may have been driven by frustration, but it was seen as impious and likely contributed to his assassination by his own sons a few years later. Ancient accounts suggest he was murdered while praying to the gods he had offended. Sennacherib's successor, Esarhaddon, 680 to 669 BCE, immediately sought to make amends for this travesty. He officially rescinded the curse on Babylon, ordered its reconstruction, and even returned the idol of Marduk which Sennacherib had carried off. Esarhaddon showed great humility. Babylon was rebuilt on old foundations, and he participated in ceremonies to restore its gods. However, tellingly, he kept Marduk's statue in Assyria for most of his reign, perhaps as insurance against Babylonian revolt. Only near the end of his reign was the statue sent back, and normal religious service resumed, healing the rift. Yet turmoil returned when Ashurbanipal became Assyrian king. He faced a civil war against his own brother Shamash-shum-ukin, whom Esarhaddon had appointed as king of Babylon. This fratricidal war, 652 to 648 BCE, saw Babylon besieged by Ashurbanipal's forces. The city held out stubbornly until famine gripped Babylon so severely that some defenders resorted to cannibalism. In 648 BCE, Babylon fell to Ashurbanipal, who punished the city harshly, though he didn't destroy it outright as Sennacherib had. It was a dark chapter, underscoring Babylon's precarious position under Assyrian domination. Babylon's lowest points, however, were soon followed by a dramatic resurgence. The Assyrian Empire began to crumble after Ashurbanipal's death circa 631 BCE. Seizing the moment, a Chaldean tribal chief named Nabopolassar led a revolt in 626 BCE. He succeeded in expelling the Assyrian officials and declared himself king of Babylon. This marked the birth of the Neo-Babylonian Empire, also called the Chaldean Empire. Nabopolassar allied with the Medes, a rising power in Iran, and together they dealt the death blow to Assyria. The great cities of Assur and Nineveh fell by 612 BCE. Babylon was now free and poised to reclaim its former glory. Nabopolassar's son would go on to become the most famous Babylonian ruler of all, Nebuchadnezzar II, ruled 605 to 562 BCE. Under Nebuchadnezzar II, Babylon reached the zenith of its wealth and splendor. Militarily, he expanded the empire from the Persian Gulf to the borders of Egypt. He is well known for his campaigns in the Levant, destroying Jerusalem in 587 BCE, which led to the Babylonian captivity of the Jews, an event that would ensure Babylon's infamy in biblical tradition. Through war, booty, and tribute, Nebuchadnezzar amassed huge resources, much of which he invested in ambitious building projects in Babylon. Indeed, Nebuchadnezzar II can rightly be called the architect of Babylon's magnificence. He embarked on a vast program to rebuild, enlarge, and adorn the city, virtually recreating Babylon on a grander scale. Massive double-city walls were constructed, encircling Babylon with multiple layers of fortifications that ancient authors claimed were impenetrable. These walls, known by names like Imgur-Enlil and Nimiti-Enlil, were said to be so broad that chariots could race atop them abreast, while there is some exaggeration in classical accounts. Archaeological remains do show extremely thick mud brick ramparts. Nebuchadnezzar also built a grand moat around the city, integrating the Euphrates River as part of Babylon's defenses. According to tradition, Babylon had 8 fortified gates, the most famous of which was the Ishtar Gate on the north side of the inner city. Reconstructed Ishtar Gate of Babylon on display at the Pergamon Museum in Berlin. It was built circa 575 BCE by Nebuchadnezzar II as the main entrance to the inner city, clad in brilliant blue-glazed bricks decorated with lions, bulls, and dragons. The Ishtar Gate was a masterpiece of ancient architecture and art. Nebuchadnezzar had it faced with glazed bricks of deep blue, adorned with procession rows of sacred animals in relief, lions striding proudly, symbol of the goddess Ishtar, fierce aurochs bulls, symbol of the storm god Adad, and Mushushu dragons, symbol of Marduk. Through this gate ran the processional way, a brick-paved street over half a mile long that led from the city's northern entrance to the temple of Marduk. Each spring during the New Year festival, statues of the gods would travel down this road. Its walls were lined with over 100 golden lions on blue tile, an awe-inspiring sight for those attending the festivities. Visitors entering through the Ishtar Gate would behold a city gleaming with color. Not only the gate, but also many temples and palaces were decorated with glazed brick murals, vividly depicting griffins, palm trees, and geometric designs. One surviving piece is a portion of Nebuchadnezzar's throne room facade, its bricks colored in blue, yellow, and white with floral and palmette motifs, a testament to the artistry of Babylon's craftsmen. Dominating the city's skyline was the great Ziggurat of Babylon, Etemenanki, located near Marduk's temple. Classical sources describe it as a towering structure of perhaps 7 to 8 levels, reaching a height of 90 meters, 300 feet, if Herodotus is to be believed. While that might be an overstatement, it was surely an impressive tower visible for miles on the flat plain. Marduk's temple Esagila lay adjacent, richly endowed with gold and offerings. Nebuchadnezzar renovated these sacred precincts, even installing huge solid bronze doors at temple gateways. It was said that inside Esagila was a golden statue of Marduk and a fabulously decorated shrine, though these treasures were later looted by foreign conquerors in subsequent centuries. Nebuchadnezzar II didn't neglect secular architecture either. He built himself at least 3 grand palaces in Babylon. The southern palace near the Ishtar Gate covered acres and included banquet halls, gardens, and residential quarters for the royal family and court. It was in one of those palace courtyards that later legends place the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, famed as one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. According to ancient Greek and Roman accounts, these were a series of terraced gardens filled with exotic trees and flowers, ingeniously irrigated by water-lifting devices, said to have been built by Nebuchadnezzar to please his Median wife who missed the green hills of her homeland. The Hanging Garden story remains tantalizing. No extant Babylonian texts mention them, and modern archaeology in Babylon has not definitively identified their remains. Some historians even speculate the legend might have originated from gardens in the Assyrian city of Nineveh. Still, whether they existed or not, the legend of the Hanging Gardens testifies to the enduring image of Babylon as a place of lush, man-made paradise amid the dry plain. They have inspired art and imagination for centuries, contributing to Babylon's renown in world culture. Under Nebuchadnezzar's long reign, Babylon was at its pinnacle, the Golden City, as it's called in the Bible, Isaiah 14:4, ruling an empire and dazzling all who beheld it. It truly became what UNESCO describes as an expression of this civilization's creativity through its unique urban design, monumental architecture, and the decorative display of royal power. Babylon at this time not only projected political might, but also radiated cultural influence throughout the Near East. Its scholars were busy recording astronomical observations. Its priests were compiling and updating ancient literature. Its traders were linking the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean. Little wonder that later generations would look back on Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon as the epitome of an opulent ancient city. Even as Babylon prospered materially, it was sowing seeds of legends that would outlast the city's physical existence. The Hebrew Bible provides one lens of Babylon's legacy. In Jewish memory, Babylon was both a real threat and a symbol of oppression. Nebuchadnezzar's armies destroyed Jerusalem and Solomon's temple, and exiled the Judeans to Babylon in the 6th century BCE. This trauma is recorded in texts like the Book of Kings and laments like Psalm 137, "By the rivers of Babylon we sat and wept." As a result, Babylon appears in the Bible as an archetype of a proud, idolatrous power, an enemy of Judah in historical narratives, and later a metaphor for imperial evil in apocalyptic visions. The Book of Daniel, set during the exile, portrays Babylon's court with stories of Daniel and his friends, the fiery furnace, and the famous writing on the wall, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin, that foretold Babylon's fall. More on that shortly. In the New Testament's book of Revelation, Babylon the Great is a codename for Rome, depicted as a decadent mother of harlots, destined for divine punishment, showing how by Roman times, Babylon's name had become synonymous with decadence and tyrannical empire in the Western imagination. Another legendary motif is the Tower of Babel from Genesis 11. This story, likely inspired by Mesopotamian ziggurats, tells of humanity building a great city and a tower to reach heaven, which God confounds by making the builders speak in different languages, thus scattering them. While the Bible doesn't explicitly name the city as Babylon, it calls it Babel, and the connection is natural, especially since the Hebrew wordplay links Babel to confusion. Later Jewish and Christian writers firmly identified the unfinished tower with Babylon's ziggurat. Herodotus also wrote of a temple of Bel, Marduk, in Babylon with a high tower that one could climb via a spiral ramp. So the legend of a great tower in Babylon became part of popular lore, symbolizing human pride and divine judgment. This story has been retold in countless forms, contributing to Babylon's mystique as the place where the world's languages diverged. Babylonian literature itself also carried on Babylon's fame. The Epic of Gilgamesh, though originating in Sumerian times, was preserved and popularized in Babylonian copies, one of the earliest great works of literature, featuring the king of Uruk on a quest for immortality. Tales of the flood, Atrahasis, of Ishtar's descent into the underworld, of the creation, Enuma Elish, and many others were written on cuneiform tablets in Babylon and spread across the Near East. These stories influenced later mythologies and even have echoes in biblical narratives. For example, the Babylonian flood myth likely informed the story of Noah. In a sense, Babylon became a crucible of ancient lore, curating and exporting the cultural heritage of Mesopotamia far and wide. Additionally, Babylon's scientific legacy is not to be overlooked. Scholars in Babylon during the Neo-Babylonian and subsequent periods made meticulous astronomical observations. They mapped the movements of planets and stars, developing a lunisolar calendar and refining the 12-sign zodiac. The division of the circle into 360 degrees, hours into 60 minutes, minutes into 60 seconds. These concepts in math and timekeeping come from the Babylonian base 60 system. The city's reputation for astrological wisdom was so high that later Greek and Roman writers would refer to learned stargazers as Chaldeans. Hellenistic science was enriched by Babylonian astronomy and mathematics, showing the continuity of knowledge from Babylon to the classical world. Even today, our modern astronomy and mathematics owe a debt to those ancient observers on Babylon's rooftops charting the heavens. In the folk memory of the Middle East, Babylon also appears in other guises. For example, in Islamic tradition, the Quran, Surah Al-Baqarah 2:102, Babylon is the setting where two angels, Harut and Marut, descended to test humankind by teaching them magical arts, a legend that positions Babylon as a place of arcane knowledge and sorcery. And in medieval Europe, the Babylonian captivity metaphor was used to describe the Avignon papacy, again invoking Babylon as a symbol of exile and decadence. Clearly, long after the city was gone, Babylon lived on as an idea and a symbol, sometimes admired for its wonders, more often admonished as a lesson in hubris. No empire is eternal, and Babylon's came to an abrupt end in 539 BCE. In that year, the armies of Cyrus II of Persia, Cyrus the Great, marched on Babylon. By this time, Babylon had a new king, Nabonidus, 556 to 539 BCE, who, interestingly, was not of Nebuchadnezzar's lineage and had eccentric religious ideas. He favored the moon god Sin over Babylon's Marduk, and even spent years away from the capital on a sojourn in Arabia. His absence left his son Belshazzar acting as prince regent in Babylon. Discontent simmered, as Nabonidus's neglect of Marduk's cult alienated the powerful priesthood, and his military focus elsewhere left the empire perhaps less defended. Cyrus capitalized on this situation. He portrayed himself as a liberator come to restore Marduk's proper worship and relieve Babylon of a maladroit king. According to the famous Cyrus cylinder, an inscription discovered in Babylon, Cyrus was welcomed by the people and entered Babylon without a battle, as the gates of Babylon were opened to him by divine favor, Marduk's will, a piece of Persian propaganda perhaps, but broadly consistent with the lack of damage in the city. Greek sources, notably Herodotus, narrate a more dramatic tale, that Cyrus's men diverted the Euphrates River upstream, lowering the water level so that Persian troops could sneak into the city along the riverbed under the walls during a night festival. This legend of the river diversion is popular but not confirmed by Babylonian contemporary records. What is clear is that Babylon fell with minimal resistance in 539 BCE, marking the end of the Neo-Babylonian Empire. The biblical book of Daniel encapsulates the moment with the story of Belshazzar's feast. As the last Babylonian king feasted, a ghostly hand wrote a cryptic Aramaic message on the palace wall, which the prophet Daniel interpreted as judgment. God has numbered the days of your kingdom and brought it to an end. You have been weighed and found wanting. Your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. That very night, the story goes, Babylon was taken by surprise and Belshazzar slain. Though largely a moral tale, it captures the suddenness of Babylon's collapse. The once mighty city passed into the hands of the Achaemenid Persian Empire. Under Persian rule, Babylon was treated relatively well initially. Cyrus and his successors respected Babylon's importance. Cyrus's son Cambyses and later Darius I even performed Babylonian royal rituals, like taking the hand of Marduk, to legitimize their rule. Babylon became the capital of the richest satrapy province in the Persian Empire and remained a center of learning and commerce. Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BCE, was deeply impressed by Babylon, calling it the world's most splendid city. However, when Babylon later rebelled against Persian King Xerxes I in 482 BCE, the reprisal was severe. Xerxes destroyed Babylon's fortifications and damaged its temples, even carrying off the great golden statue of Marduk and allegedly melting it down. Babylon's status declined after this. It would never again be an independent power. In 331 BCE, the city surrendered to Alexander the Great, who defeated the Persians. Alexander entered Babylon in triumph, an event later romanticized in paintings of him taking Babylon uncontested. The Macedonian conqueror showed great favor to Babylon. He ordered repairs to temples and envisaged Babylon as a possible imperial capital. He was fascinated by the city's science and had Babylonian priests explain the movements of planets to him. Tragically, Alexander died in Babylon in 323 BCE in Nebuchadnezzar's palace before he could carry out his grand plans. One can imagine the irony. This greatest of conquerors breathed his last in the palace of a long-dead Mesopotamian king, a potent symbol of the continuity of imperial ambitions at Babylon. After Alexander's death, his generals, the Diadochi, fought over the empire. Babylon fell to Seleucus I, who initially also respected it, but soon decided to found a new city, Seleucia on the Tigris, in Seleucid Empire, around 275 BCE, and forcibly transferred Babylon's population to this new capital. This was perhaps the final death knell for Babylon as a living metropolis. In the following centuries, Babylon gradually decayed. By the Parthian era, circa 2nd century BCE, 3rd century CE, Babylon was mostly in ruins, though there is evidence a small community still lived amidst the fallen halls, and the astronomical diaries on clay tablets continued there until at least the 1st century BCE, indicating a lingering scholarly presence. There are references to Babylon even in early Islamic times, a village called Babel. However, essentially the great city became deserted, its once grand structures collapsing into mounds of mud brick rubble. As one later Arab poet mused, "Babylon is fallen. You will seek in vain for its walls. Only the fox and the owl dwell there." The earth swallowed Babylon, preserving its broken bricks under layers of silt and sand. For ages, Babylon was known only through tales and scattered classical references. Its site in Iraq, near present-day Hilla, was marked by large mounds. The locals knew the area as Babel and respected it as ancient ruins. Modern interest in Babylon was sparked by European travelers in the 17th to 18th centuries. Men like Pietro della Valle and Claudius Rich identified the location and brought back bricks and artifacts. But it was not until the 19th century that serious excavation began. An Assyrian-born archaeologist, Hormuzd Rassam, working for the British Museum, conducted digs at Babylon in the 1870s and discovered the famous Cyrus cylinder in 1879, a clay cylinder with Cyrus's account of taking Babylon. However, the most systematic exploration was led by Robert Koldewey, a German archaeologist, who excavated Babylon from 1899 to 1917. Koldewey's team uncovered astonishing pieces of the city. They cleared and mapped the streets, temples, palaces, and walls of Inner Babylon, identified the ziggurat's massive foundation, and famously unearthed the shattered remains of the Ishtar Gate and processional way. The Ishtar Gate's glazed bricks were painstakingly recovered and eventually reassembled in Berlin, where the reconstructed gate and a portion of the processional way now stands as one of the most iconic exhibits of Near Eastern antiquity. These archaeological revelations confirmed that many of the ancient accounts of Babylon's grandeur were not pure myth. Inscribed bricks with Nebuchadnezzar's name turned up by the thousands. He, like many Mesopotamian kings, had each brick stamped with his inscriptions. Foundations of huge structures aligned with descriptions by Herodotus and cuneiform texts. Koldewey even thought he found evidence of an unusual series of vaults and wells, which he controversially suggested might be the base of the Hanging Gardens, though this interpretation remains debated. In any case, by the early 20th century, Babylon had been rediscovered, capturing public imagination. Its artifacts traveled to museums worldwide, and scholarly decipherment of Babylonian cuneiform tablets, such as economic records, literary texts, and legal documents, began to paint a vivid picture of life in the city. In the late 20th century, Babylon entered a new chapter when Saddam Hussein, then president of Iraq, undertook a controversial reconstruction project. In the 1980s, he ordered partial rebuilding of Babylon's ruins, including razing some walls and edifices using modern bricks inscribed with his own name, in imitation of Nebuchadnezzar's bricks. A large modern palace was also built on a hill overlooking the site. While these reconstructions were intended to celebrate Iraq's heritage, many archaeologists criticized them for damaging the original remains and blurring the lines between ancient and new. Then, during the 2003 Iraq War and its aftermath, the site suffered further when a military base was established there, causing disturbances. Fortunately, in recent years, efforts have been made to preserve Babylon. In 2019, UNESCO finally inscribed Babylon as a World Heritage Site, recognizing its outstanding value as a unique testimony to one of the most influential empires of the ancient world and its profound impact on human history. Today, visitors can walk among Babylon's ruins, the outlines of temples and palaces, the foundations of the ziggurat, the reconstructed Ishtar Gate, and feel a connection to a story that began over 4,000 years ago. As we conclude our journey, we recognize that Babylon's legacy is multifaceted. It is a real place, a site of archaeological treasures and historical records that teach us about urban life at the dawn of civilization. It is also a timeless symbol, one that has served as a model, parable, scapegoat, and symbol for over 2,000 years, appearing in the religious and cultural traditions of much of the world. Babylon has embodied human achievement in law, science, and culture, and human hubris in its legendary pride and fall. Its influence is evident in our legal principles, in our mathematics and calendars, in literature from the Epic of Gilgamesh to the Bible, and in art from ancient reliefs to modern paintings. Few cities can claim such an outsized role in both history and imagination. In its heyday, standing on the streets of Babylon, one would have witnessed a truly cosmopolitan city. Bustling bazaars with goods from distant lands, priests leading processions for gods, scribes carving cuneiform on tablets, towering walls and glittering polychrome facades reflecting the desert sun. One might have heard many languages, Akkadian, Aramaic, others, spoken by people of various ethnicities drawn to the imperial capital. That vibrant tapestry eventually faded, Yet the memory of Babylon never did. From clay tablet to scripture to archaeological dig, Babylon's story was preserved and retold, allowing us, today, to marvel at its grandeur and glean lessons from its fate. Babylon's saga, its rise from obscurity, its golden age of culture and power, and its ultimate ruin, offers a mirror to the story of civilization itself. It reminds us how urban ingenuity can create wonders like the Ishtar Gate and advanced knowledge of stars and laws. It also reminds us of the impermanence of human glory. Even the mightiest city can fall to neglect and time. Yet Babylon did not vanish without leaving a profound imprint. As a cradle of writing and law, a nexus of myth and religion, and a beacon of architectural innovation, Babylon influenced countless civilizations that followed. Long after its bricks have crumbled back into the earth of Iraq, the spirit of Babylon endures in our words. To Babel comes from Babel's tale, in our faith traditions, and in our collective memory of antiquity. In the end, Babylon is more than just an ancient city. It is a legacy, a complex, multifaceted legacy of human achievement and human fallibility. From its temples and gardens to its legends of pride and punishment, Babylon continues to captivate and educate. Standing amid its ruins today, one might reflect on a famous verse reimagined. How are the mighty fallen, and Babylon the Great is become a dwelling of dust. Yet from that dust we have resurrected knowledge, and through that knowledge, Babylon lives on as an immortal chapter in the story of humanity. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share your thoughts in the comments, subscribe for more fascinating stories, and ring the bell so you never miss a new episode from Cypher History. Stay curious.